All right, so this video here, we're going to talk about two artworks that were for the assignment 1.01. Now, you did not have to do both artworks. You were to have selected one of them and then talk about it in much more depth and detail. So the point of this video is just to help point out a couple things that you might have not noticed or may have not have thought about that maybe you can go back and add to your assignment before you turn it in. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Boxers of Thera. It is a Minoan fresco artwork. So that's like a wall mural. And you're going to hear the word fresco used quite a bit. Fresco is the early form of painting. Artisans did not used to paint on canvas. So instead, what a fresco means is that they would apply like a wet plaster to the wall. And then while it was still wet, they would add their color or their pigment. Okay. Now, this technique, the Minoans used what was called a fresco secco. So they would put their base color in first, such as this terracotta color. It's earthly. It's a common kind of clay color pigment that you can get. They would let the fresco dry, and then they would add a secondary color, more likely this blue for details. Um, and added to that. Like blue in itself is a rare kind of pigment found in nature. So anything with blue is considered kind of a luxurious. It wasn't a common color that was there. So that's why we only see it kind of sparingly. So when I look at an artwork, I like to think of the theme first. What is it that I'm physically looking at? So here we have two figures. It looks like they're fighting, and so then I go, okay, well, why are they showing this? Is it about a person? Is it about authority? So referencing that page 2 of the lesson, it gave a list of very common themes that many artisans would depict, or why they would depict their imagery. And it doesn't seem to fit any one of those. So I kind of want to make a new theme here, and I'm going to call it cultural lifestyle because it's showing a leisurely activity. And through my additional research, I learned that this culture. Common sports were boxing and wrestling. So it just makes sense that they're showing a scene of that sport. We have the boxing glove there. If we look a little bit more onto it, the two figures seem relatively identical. The only difference is the fact that one is not really clothed and the other one has a lot of jewelry or innate sort of decorative details. So that can lead me as a detective to assume that maybe this character on the left, this figure, is of more nobility or a higher social class, and he is sparring for practice with maybe a servant or slave here. And that typically is common practice among a lot of cultures. Okay. From there, I can read about, more just general facts that we can get through our reading. But what you won't find on website sources for the most part is to teach you how to look a little bit deeper into how the figures are being presented or to get a sense of the style of the culture. So that's where these bullet points come in. The first thing is it shows fluidity of movement, but notice that it's incorrect realistic proportions and postures. At first glance, we can recognize and know, okay, it's two people standing profile, they're hitting or punching each other. It looks realistic. But upon closer inspection, you should notice that the legs are not shown accurately. As both legs go down to the very bottom, they're seen as a profile. I have this kind of elongated, twisted torso, and then my head is seen as a profile. But if we take a closer look, the eye is shown as a frontal view, not as a profile view. So you have a lot of actually unrealistic kind of twisted perspectives happening. Okay, so even though we can identify what the action or the pose is, realistically, it's not accurate. Okay. The other thing you want to notice here is yeah, there are two figures, but in their culture, showing individuality is not stressed or important, or at least it isn't in this particular fresco. There's no difference between the figure on the right and the figure on the left, other than the jewelry and more ornate details on the figure of the left. But if we look at the two, Their facial features, their eye, their body, even like their body proportions, are all exactly the same. That's something to pay attention to as you explore art. Okay, and you have to think, well, when do artists treat their figures as a more expressive mode versus a documentary mode? And when I say documentary, they're just documenting the action or what's happening. They're not trying to document a particular individual. It's just a male figure. Also, if we're thinking about, well, if I was fighting or boxing, there is no realistic emotions here. They're just showing basic action. So even though I'm fighting, emotion was not something that was focused on in this culture's artwork. They have a blank face, they're not squinting. And that could be because it's not necessary because they're just wanting to document again the lifestyle. Or two, maybe the artisans weren't sure how to show that expression, but there's certainly a lack of emotion happening. And then it heavily relies on the art elements of line and shape. So if we're just trying to understand those art elements and how that plays out visually, the whole artwork, the bodies appear to be silhouettes, right? They're flat shapes. We don't get a sense of value, light to dark of the form. There's no realistic sense of space, like the illusion of depth. Like this leg should be up higher because it's further away than this frontal leg, but yet they're at the same playing field. So there's no sense of realistic space, no sense of texture, like hair texture versus clothing texture. So the only thing that they're relying on for you to make visual sense of this piece is the line, and then the lines then produce shapes, okay? So that's it for this one. Next, we're going to talk about the other potential artwork you could have chosen.